I'm going to refer you back to Psalm 11 again this week, and I'll freely confess the lesson that I provided in this space last week was an excuse to give you this lesson. This is the one that I had in mind the entire time. We were talking in Psalm 11 about the way that we respond as God's people, as God's children in times of adversity. And I'd like to follow up on that a little bit by finishing the story, essentially. We talked about how, in the end, basically, you just have to trust in God. You have to believe that God is watching over you and that He is caring for you and providing for you, and that your confidence is well placed in Him. Well, none of that accomplishes anything, of course, if God doesn't actually show up to the battle eventually. And that's what we want to talk about here today, how God will eventually resolve all of these conflicts, all of these difficulties, all these stresses that are affecting the lives of His people. Let's go back and read the psalm again, Psalm 11, for the choir director of David. I have taken refuge in the Lord. How can you say to me, escape to the mountains like a bird? For look, the wicked string bows. They put their arrows on bowstrings to shoot from the shadows of the upright in heart. When the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in His holy temple. The Lord, His throne is in heaven. His eyes watch. His gaze examines everyone. The Lord examines the righteous, but He hates the wicked and those who love violence. Let Him rain burning coals and sulfur on the wicked. Let a scorching wind be the portion in their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. The upright will see His face. And that last phrase is what we're going to be focusing on here today in this space, the idea of the upright being able to see His face. Last week, we were talking about the approach that we take as individuals. And when the question is asked here, when the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The upshot of it is essentially not a whole lot. There's not very much you can do when the world is crumbling around you. There may be some short-term approaches that you may take. You may have some kind of local effect somehow, some temporary effect. But if the very world around us is crumbling, if the ground underneath which our entire culture, our entire society, our entire way of life is built is coming apart, and sometimes it feels like it is, well, then what are righteous people going to do about that? Implicitly filling out the question there, what are we going to do to keep it from crumbling, to reverse this state, essentially? And my argument last week was there's not much you can do. You can trust in God, that He's watching over things. You can worship God as the creator, as the sustainer, as the one who gives us every good and perfect gift. And you can wait for Him to resolve this in His way and have confidence that His way is best, His timing is best. Try to build enough faith where those things are going to be adequate for us, that we can sleep easy at night. We can have confidence in the future because God has the future, that we don't have the future ourselves. It's better off in His hand anyway. And again, all of that is predicated on the idea that God will eventually show up, that the Lord will actually show His face eventually, that He will appear on the scene and testify on our behalf and create circumstances that are advantageous to us, that will show us to be victorious in all of this and vindicate us and the faith that we've placed in Him all this time. I would like to offer to you three different ways in which this is the case, me and my 3-point outlines again. But I think there are at least three ways in which God shows His face to His people in times of adversity. And I have no doubt in my mind, really, that the first one is the one that David had in mind when he wrote this psalm down. When he was encountering difficulty, when he was encountering hardship and such things as that eventually God will make His face known. He will make His presence known. And the idea of showing His face, of course, that's a rather loaded expression. We talked about this, I believe, last week, going back to Exodus chapter 33, the appearance of God and His face, what exactly that means. Well, we can never see God in His fullness. We can't see the full presence of God. But what we can do is see His face metaphorically. And there are many, many passages, we'll turn to a few of them, that deal with this in so many words. that God will be there. And although we may not see his face in the literal sense, the way that Moses had asked for, the way that we might ask for, that's not our lot. We're not going to get that. But he will show up. And if we don't see his face, we'll at least see the implications behind his face. I think that's what David means here, that he has confidence that his troubles will be resolved and resolved in his favor. And we're speaking in general terms here, of course. We're all well aware that sometimes the bad guys will win. And depending on how you define your problems and how you define resolution of your problems, it may be that God does not, quote unquote, show his face. But in the big picture, in the general consideration of good versus evil, we have confidence that God is watching over us, that he is blessing us and providing for us and vindicating us. We see that over and over again in the Psalms. I'll refer to Psalm 46, one of my favorites. In verse number 10, you know the text, I'm sure. Stop fighting or cease striving or be silent, be still. Some versions have here. Stop fighting and know that I am God, exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. The time will come when he will show himself to be who he actually is. And again, you may or may not be satisfied with exactly how and particularly exactly when that may happen. But having faith should be enough to get us through these times, to know that God is in fact God, that he is sovereign in the earth, and that justice in the big picture is an inevitable consequence of living in God's earth. God is, by his definition, by his nature, just and exacting. He will administer justice in the best possible way. And we see that happening all the time. There's a pagan concept called karma that gets a lot of the credit for it these days. I wish we would not succumb to that terminology. This is not karma that catches up with us when we do things wrong, or more to the point, catches up with the people who are afflicting us. We just kind of laugh when the person who was rude to us or cut us off in traffic or ran the red light, they get pulled over by the state trooper, and we laugh and we say, there's karma coming to get you. It's not karma. It's not even the state trooper coming to get you. That's God coming to get you. God administers justice in the world, and any justice that you see in this world is by its nature a reflection of his justice. We don't always see it in the short term. That would be kind of nifty if we did, but God calls upon us to have faith in these situations and to believe that he will, in his time, not necessarily ours, administer that justice. And because we believe, because we know that God is reigning on the earth, we have confidence that that justice will be administered. And that should get us through these hard times, these difficult times, these challenging times, when it looks like God is, as we mentioned a couple of times last week, asleep at the switch, that he is not paying attention. Maybe he doesn't love us after all. Maybe he's not providing for us after all. No, he absolutely is, in his way. And by faith, if we wait for him, if we continue to honor him, we will see the administration of his justice in a general sense, at least, if not specifically how and where we would like. He will show his justice, and we have confidence in that. And there are other ways that he administers his justice also. There are other ways in which he shows his face, which is the rest of the lesson. And really the more important lessons, whether you see your enemy get what's coming to him within your lifetime, is really almost irrelevant. It may be nice to you, it may be faith affirming to you, but whether you see it or not, you should be able to have confidence in God for the other two reasons that we're talking about. The first of which, the second reason overall, is that God showed his face in a very specific and a very literal sense. And again, these prophecies that you see in the Psalms and the rest of the Old Testament, I have little doubt that the psalmist or the other prophets didn't even know they were offering a prophecy, let alone understand what the prophecy meant. But either way, whatever David knew or didn't know, and whenever he knew or didn't know it, we believe as Christians that there was a plan already in place, already being carried out in its early stages, through David, ironically, to bring the face of God to planet Earth, literally, and to show the face of God to humanity. And we have the ripple effect. Even though Jesus isn't in the flesh anymore, we have the vision of him through the inspired writers of the New Testament, we were able to see Jesus, and in so doing, see the face of God, who was called in Colossians 2, verse 9, the fullness of deity in bodily form. When we look at Jesus, we are looking at God. Now, that is at least as much of God as we can handle in this life. There's certainly a sense in which Jesus had to forego certain aspects of his divine nature so that he could inhabit human flesh. God can't appear on earth, but such as he could, as much as he could within a human body, that's exactly what Jesus did. And I think that's what Colossians 2 verse 9 is talking about in other passages also. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld his glory. Glories of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John 1 verse 14. That confidence that we have in Jesus, that Jesus is showing us the face of God, is detailed for us in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse number 18 especially. We all with unveiled, well, let's back up a little bit. In verse number 15, yet today, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts, which is to say, simply reading the Old Testament, you cannot possibly understand everything that God has in store for you because it wasn't given to us in the Old Testament. But whenever a person, verse 16, turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Jesus gives us the full picture of what God had in mind for us. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. We all, with unveiled faces, are looking as in a mirror at the glory of the Lord and are being transformed into that same image from glory to glory. This is from the Lord who is the Spirit. The Spirit reveals Jesus Christ to us through the pages of the written word. And when we see him, not only do we see what God is, we find ourselves being transformed into that image. We become more like God ourselves. Now, if Jesus was limited, how much more so are we limited? I'm not suggesting that we're going to get all the way there, or even that we're going to fully reflect the image of Jesus Christ. But that's the plan of the gospel, that we are making ourselves over, or really more to the point, the Spirit is making us over into the image of Jesus. Well, what's so special about that? What's special about that is that Jesus shows us God. And so we are becoming what God has always intended for us to be. We're becoming the perfect version of ourselves. We're on the road, at least. Now, God's going to complete that in heaven, and that's, spoiler alert, the third point that we're going to get to. But for now, we content ourselves with the idea that we have looked at the face of God in Jesus Christ and seeing him as he was here in the flesh, reading about him, what he said, what he did, his character, his behavior, his value system. All of these things show us what God is in a way that would not have been possible any other way. Even the appearances of God that we see in the Old Testament to Abraham and to Moses and others as well, even these fall short of the revelation of God given through Jesus Christ. Everything that we can know about God in the flesh is shown to us in Jesus. And so therefore, in a very real sense, God had a face. God did show his face, the face of Jesus, to us here on earth for 30 plus years, and he continues to show his face as the Spirit continues to reveal Jesus to us through the Word. And what an incredible blessing that is, to know that God is with us, that he is continuing to company with us through the Spirit, not just for a few years back in the day, but even today. We are in the presence of the face of God. And by having Jesus with us, we're crucified with him. It's no longer I that live, but Christ lives in me, Galatians 2, verse 20. Jesus is inside of us, and as such, we have access to the face of God. He is always looking upon us. We are always looking upon him. That fellowship that we have a little glimmer of, you might say, is content for us, is enough to content us. We know that we are in the presence of God. What a blessing that is. But that brings up the third point. There is coming a day in which all of the veils are going to be removed. There is not going to be any qualifiers at all. Yes, David was able to see the face of God in a sense because he saw the things that God did. Yes, absolutely. We're able to see the face of God today because we see Jesus, and Jesus is the image of God. Yes, absolutely. All of those things are true, but all of those things have qualifications on them. Even people who companied with Jesus didn't see God in his fullness because God couldn't appear in his fullness to human beings. There's going to come a time when that will no longer be the case. There's going to come a time when God will appear to us in every sense. Revelation chapter 22 and verse number 4 talks about in this great image here of heavenly realms and heavenly glory as all these conflicts are resolved for the people of God. Revelation, chapter 22 and verse number 4, turning over there to read it here, it says, they will see his face, right? The people of God who have come through the great tribulation, who have come through this tremendous victory and tremendous defeat before the victory. They will see his face and his name will be on their foreheads. It says night will be no more. People not need the light of the lamp, etc. This full and complete fellowship is available in heavenly realms. Now, some people will argue, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with this, that the picture in Revelation is of the church here on earth, the victorious church, very much the same story that we've gotten already, that we saw in the first point we were looking at there, that God is with his people. He reveals himself to his people. He shepherds his people, especially in the person of Jesus. Whatever kind of conflict may seem to be going the wrong way, ultimately we are on his side and he is on our side, and we are victorious in all of this, and we feel the fellowship and we feel the power and we feel the vindication in our lives as we see the defeat of our enemies, etc., etc. I have no doubt that that is part of the picture here in Revelation 22. If that's all it is, it's backed up the point that we've already been making here, that God is with us, that we do in fact see his face in a spiritual kind of sense. But I also have very little doubt, if any doubt, that this is looking forward to a greater realization, that the victory that we see here on earth is a portent, is a foreshadowing of a greater victory. Something that's seen in 1 John chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. And I know that not everybody, even among our fellowship, believes in heavenly existence and things like that. But I believe what the Bible teaches here, that we will come in contact with God on the other side of death in a way that is impossible for us here. It's described as being made over into the image of Jesus, and it's completed for us. In 1 John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, will be able to see him as he is, because we are going to be like him, that we are transformed, not just in a spiritual sense, not just in a partial sense, but in a very real and fundamental sense, even a physical sense, that we are made into the spiritual beings that we were always intended to be, the kind of spiritual being that Jesus is. Now, the Bible doesn't explain a whole lot about that, and I certainly can't go beyond what the Bible says with regard to those kind of things. But we accept by faith that God's work in us, his transformation process that's going on in us here in the flesh, is going to be completed in heavenly realms. And if it's impossible for us to see God in his fullness because we're only human beings, that will be changed, because we will be changed. Jesus now is in the presence of God. He sees God in his fullness, as was the case in the beginning. We also, according to this passage and other passages, will be in the presence of God when all of this work is complete. And again, I don't doubt that, at least in part, Psalm 11 is talking about that. It's not just that the bad guys are going to get what's coming to them. It's not just that a Savior is coming that's going to give you a better picture of what God has in mind for you and about his nature and his power and all that. That's all true. But there's also a sense in which he is going to show his face in his fullness. And what an amazing thing that's going to be, how incredible it is going to be that we are transformed into the image of Jesus, not just in a general sense or a spiritual sense, but in a real sense, a tangible sense. I'm tempted to say a physical sense. I don't know exactly how much the word physical has to do with the afterlife, what kind of physical body, if any, we're going to have here. Whatever it's going to be, whatever body that is, that resurrected body that Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it's the kind of body that Jesus has, as best I understand anyway, from 1 John 3, verses 1 and 2. And what an incredible experience that will be, to spend eternity, to spend a lifetime of lifetimes before the throne of God, having full and complete fellowship that does not depend on the ins and outs of our own choices or behavior, something that's not subject to change or temptation, etc. Real fellowship, permanent fellowship for all of eternity. That's what we have to look forward to in heavenly realms, as I understand the scripture. And please continue to study this and seek the face of God as you try to live your life as God would have you not just so that you'll feel better about your life here on earth, but because God has plans for you that transcend this physical existence. And I, for one, am very eager to be a part of that. Thank you very much for studying along. Continue to read the Psalms, continue to derive the lessons from it that the Lord is trying to give to us, and see the face of God in his behavior, in his Son, and ultimately in heavenly realms. Thank you very much for following along, and God bless.